Hey there. Today we're going to talk about COVID and candles. Now, depending on how chronically online you are, or maybe just regular online if you've come across some of the reporting on this already, you may already know that there's been an interesting link observed between COVID and Yankee candles when you look at some of the data. Specifically, how poor reviews for the candles are translating into major waves and variants of COVID across America, or at least the part of it that uses Amazon, as that's where most of this review data is coming from. And no matter how you may feel about COVID itself and the politics that have become attached to it, this is an interesting piece of information. I've personally heard about this phenomenon a few times over the past few years, and when I start to look, I could only find a few articles from a little over a year ago covering it, so I figured I'd give it a shot myself. Why, you might ask, am I choosing to cover this now when most of the coverage is aging? Well, you may be able to figure that one out yourself, but you're gonna have to wait a few minutes before you can smugly grin and nod for getting it right. Sorry. So, when you first look at this connection, shown here in all its statistical glory in a chart from The Economist, it seems almost like one of these charts that intro-level statistics professors use to show students that correlation doesn't always equal causation. And as an aside, here are some of my favorite examples of those. Aren't they fun? Look at that one. That's a good one. But anyway, when you look at the graph, the main one that is, and think about it, things actually start to make sense. Since we all know that one of, if not the most common symptom of COVID, even in people who don't really get sick, which is indeed in air quotes here, is a loss of smell. I, and the many others who have covered this, would probably be willing to attribute one or two examples of this as either random chance or some other true cause just showing up in both sets of data that we don't seem to be seeing, like with those previous examples. But this Yankee Candle Index, as I've seen it referred to and personally like a lot, seems to have held true for every major surge and variant from the beginning of the pandemic globally in March 2020 right through to today. Now, in case you're from somewhere they don't have Yankee candles, or maybe candles just aren't your thing, they're one of, if not the most popular candle companies in America, and they market themselves as one of the nicest too. While rather expensive as far as mass-produced candles go, and you may not believe how up there some of these handmade ones can sell for, Yankee candles are generally regarded as some of the stronger smelling, longer lasting, and just generally higher quality candles on the market, and it's this first trait that makes them of interest to us. Since people know them to be more powerfully scented, they notice much more quickly when they light them and don't smell anything or barely anything, and the higher price they paid leaves them more likely to complain about this on the websites they buy them on, especially Amazon. In fact, this was so common at one point that over the middle months of 2020, the overall reviews for Yankee candles dropped an entire star, and this is on a product where each individual scent can have hundreds or even thousands of reviews of its own. This is certainly among the stranger of the signs of the end times that I've personally seen, but I guess with the way things are going these days, Bezos had to fit himself in there somewhere eventually. Now, in looking at some deeper research on this, I was able to come up with a paper written by a professor from Northeastern about this very topic, apparently after seeing one of the same posts about it that piqued my own interest a few years ago. I was also quite happy to find that their university newsletter or magazine or whatever they call it had written up an article about it shortly after it was published that synthesized things nicely, meaning I didn't have to do it myself, so thanks for that. So our story here is that, originally starting as a joke on Twitter he figured couldn't be too hard to model, this professor, whose name is Nicholas Beauchamp, by the way, I hope I got that right, did a relatively simple data collection, just setting a Chrome extension to flag and track one-star reviews of Yankee candles on Amazon over a 3-week period with the keywords no smell, and compare it to the COVID case data for the same period. And what he ended up with was, well, this. First off, I hope you can tell why I save this graph for now, because it's way better than the first one from a statistical standpoint in the way that graphs and data are supposed to be presented to people. That could and just might get a video all to itself one day, but for now let's try and focus on the topic at hand and see that, once again, COVID cases and candle reviews seem to directly correlate for not only one period or surge or variant, but the pandemic as a whole, which at a base level shows how important data can be for public health and research in general. While we can certainly see some outliers, and the connection's not perfect, they rarely are with well-collected data, It does indeed seem similar enough to be called significant, both in the technical and more colloquial sense of the word, and that indeed was the main finding of this study. And while, of course, outright confirming something like this requires much more independent and rigorous testing of all types, calling this COVID candle connection a theory with some real backing would not be a stretch at all. Now, on to the part why I'm telling you this now. It's because, and get those I knew it's ready, it's happening again. Yes, indeed, a quick search on Twitter, I'm not calling it X, or Amazon itself is showing a new wave of one-star reviews for Yankee candles coming in over the past few weeks, which could very well mean we're in for another spike in cases or new variant. Remember COVID? Ah, yes, COVID. When no one was allowed outside. No one was allowed outside. There we go. No one was allowed outside, and people spent 2 weeks learning skills and having fun online before just kind of freaking out until we all collectively decided to be a bit like toddlers and close our eyes and pretend it wasn't happening. Well, unfortunately, it is still happening, and that's why this time around some things are different. It's news to nobody that COVID is treated a bit differently now than it was a year and some change ago. The president has declared the pandemic over, because apparently the president gets to just kind of pick when a virus stops spreading. But again, I'm getting away from the point here and moving very quickly towards a very different part of the internet. What I'm trying to say here is that this time we may not know if the Yankee Candle Index holds true or even the extent of this surge or even if it's happening at all, since testing and reporting of COVID data has slowed or stopped outright in many places, with even the most popular of the COVID dashboards we were all obsessed with in early 2020 moving to weekly reporting or sometimes stopping altogether due to either a lack of raw data or a lack of interest from the public. So that's the basics on COVID and Yankee candles, and how sometimes correlation does equal causation, especially when you apply it on a national scale. Whether we can really confirm this or not for whatever may or may not be coming is up to the remaining doctors and administrators and data scientists who have been dealing with this for years now, and we can only hope that they stick with it long enough to deliver the needed results, not just to confirm this theory, but for the ongoing health of everyone in general. And this slowing of data reporting and testing isn't even necessarily from a lack of will or want to continue, but in many cases a simple lack of funding. With, as just mentioned, President Biden officially ending the pandemic, the government funding that was paying for not only the collection and distribution of case data, but also the testing that provided this data itself simply no longer exists, with individual states and third parties that either lack the money or manpower or simply don't want to left to fill the ever-increasing gap. This too isn't new to anyone and has been covered extensively, especially when it happened, but it's interesting here to see the direct result of it affecting this seemingly minor thing. This has been a nice, also a bit in air quotes, story about how, in a larger sense, you can sometimes get a better look at complex issues by observing data of seemingly random consequences of its effects. But that's a bit complex for someone like me who's barely coherent, and you'll have to imagine the groans from the audience there until I get better at editing. So, at the very least, I hope I've left you with an interesting tale of a strange quirk of data, or at least some decent background noise while you do something else. But anyway, let me know your own thoughts about this down below. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe. Finally, have a nice day. I'll see you all next time.